Hello, everybody. Welcome to Voices of Peace podcast. Today, we will explore the concept of peace as action with the professor Isabel Bramsen. My name is Tetiana, and I am a junior journalist at Traces and Dreams. We at Traces and Dreams work for a wiser tomorrow. We started this podcast as we believe that this is a crucial topic with a high global relevance, and we would like to bring in different and diverse voices. And I'm happy to welcome you, Professor Isabel Bramsen. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm Isabel Bramsen. I am Associate Professor and Director of Peace and Conflict Studies at Lund University, and then I'm also a mediator at the Danish Center for Conflict Resolution.
Thank you. Today we will talk about the topic peace as action. Um, could you explain to us what does this topic mean?
Yeah, so if you search on Google for pictures of war, you get lots of, active pictures of soldiers, human beings made of flesh and blood in action. Whereas if you search for Google images of peace, all you get is all kinds of like peace signs of different sorts like symbols, one handshake. But other than that, it's all about actually, peace doves and something you could wish for, in the future, peace as some symbolic achievement. That is utopian almost, that we can never actually have something passive. So I'm currently writing a book called The Logic of Peace, where I try to sort of redefine and explore peace as action, as something you do, rather than something you can sort of hope for in the, for Christmas or, in some far away future. And of course, it's peace is not just action, but by linking peace more closely to the action itself, for example, reaching out, dialogue, nonviolent demonstrations, then this peace talks didn't work out, it didn't lead to peace, then it wasn't peace in itself. Well, if you say, well, that was the very act of talking together across enemy divides is peace in itself. So I think that is particularly useful in these very challenging times where basically we have more wars going on than since the Second World War in the world, and the very systems in place, like the UN, they're supposed to kind of help us end these wars or prevent them, is significantly challenged. So even more so, I think it's important to sort of re-explore peace as action rather than something that is sort of a product.
So, if we understand it correctly, peace is more just an absence of violence.
Yeah, so I mean, you can define peace different ways. Most common ways of defining peace is as negative peace, which is the absence of violence, and then positive peace, which is kind of everything you would wish for, almost like in a good society with ecological balance and equality between genders and races and religions and so on. But that's some, as I see it, becomes almost too utopian, something that you can never really get. So I would rather define a negative piece as actions of omission. So you stop the violence. You something that you do not do. Negative piece is a ceasefire. You do not fight any longer. You cease the fire basically. Whereas so that can be definitely peace as well. But as something you do not do, whereas peace is something you do then. So positive peace then is defined positively, something you actually do. So you actually reach out across conflict lines.
Could there be a sort of a balance between this negative and positive peace? For example, when we take a look at Russia and Ukraine, what strategy would there be the best?
Yeah, so definitely negative peace can be very, very critical in many instances. Maybe, the very act of ending the violence is absolutely critical. I don't think we should diminish that at all or sort of as something less valuable because people dying is just, yeah, human lives are so precious and we should really protect them. So I think, but by linking peace more closely to action, I do think that we also, because sometimes there can be this idea that you can start a war to create peace. That was Bush Jr., the former US president. He said publicly that he started or he intervened in Iraq. He invaded Iraq in 2003 for the sake of not just peace in Iraq, but world peace, no? So, but that if you take too much like the delinking peace and action, that becomes a thing, a logic thing. Then you can have a very intense war for peace somewhere in the future. Whereas if you bring peace back to sort of actions, then then you can see sort of more clearly the paradox between, going to war for peace, basically.
I've also read that you are also an expert on nonviolent resistance, and I'd like to
Mhm.
ask about it more. What are some powerful examples of peace as action that you've studied, also in the frame of nonviolent resistance?
So nonviolent resistance is also interesting in this regard, because it's actually not about not no violence. I mean, it's not just about no violence. It's actually about action. No, so the way I've been framing peace more and more is non-enmity. So action without enmity. So, and I've been very much inspired by this whole idea of nonviolent resistance because it's not just no violence, it's actually action. And it's all kinds of actions to basically start a conflict, challenge status quo, topple a regime or challenge occupation of different sorts. And often it can go along with violence. So it's not given that it's either or, but it's all kinds of way of resisting. So it's not always that resistance, nonviolent resistance can also be for the sake of resistance itself, meaning that it's not always that it succeeds completely. So you had the Arab uprisings with I've studied them in very much detail through both video analysis and interviews with activists and going there to Bahrain and Tunisia and the border to Syria to understand how nonviolent resistance works, and sort of when it succeeds or not. But it's also one of the things that I want to bring out is, for example, when Denmark was occupied by Germany during the Second World War, uh, and I'm Danish, even if I work in Sweden and I live in Denmark here, the neighbor country. But here in Denmark, when we were occupied by Germany, we did all kinds of small acts of resistance, like singing together national songs, going back, going home from work early, making the machines that the Germans used not working suddenly. Oh, I don't know how they didn't work. And I'm saying these things to sort of, take it also down to the everyday level. And I've I mean, I haven't studied myself, but I've read also about the Ukrainian nonviolent resistance, for example, like against the Russian occupation, full-scale occupation in 2022, all kinds of small acts that sort of resisted the domination. So it's really and the occupation. So it's just to bring out that there are all kinds of ways that you can sort of basically kind of disrupt domination, and maybe you cannot end it entirely, but you can still sort of make it a lot harder to be an occupying country than it would have been otherwise.
Yes, I agree. I'm from Ukraine, and yeah, so we also tried to, when the war started, actually, we tried to preserve our language, our culture more. Myself learned so many new things, so I guess it's very important. And now we talk also about the importance of Ukrainian language, because people used to talk and still talk. A lot of people still talk Russian, and it's also very important when we have to defend ourselves.
Hmm.
Also,
And do you have examples of like, Ukrainian nonviolent resistance? during the first month of the occupation in 2022, full scale?
I guess, I mean, I was always speaking in Ukrainian because I come also from the west part of the country, but I know that a lot of people from the eastern part, switched completely to Russian, from Russian to Ukrainian in everyday life as well. And for example, now when on the social media and there are some Ukrainian influencers, they wouldn't speak Russian, and if they speak, it would be seen as it would seem. I mean, people would say, okay, that's not good. And for example, or also people tried to, we started to listen to more older, like Ukrainian songs, more traditional traditional songs. And in this way, we tried to support our defense, our soldiers, and like it gave a very important spirit, which I think lacked maybe before. And it also helped me to realize who I am, where I come from, and why is it important to, yeah, that we have to preserve our culture and our identity and nationality.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mostly
Fantastic.
to culture and to traditions and to the language.
Yeah. To preserve, yeah, and to resist by the very act of standing together, because I mean, it's preservation. At least I can speak from the Danish, example, being occupied by Germany. It's not it's preservation, but it's also community. So like to keep up, a spirit of hope and community that we can stand together in this difficult time. So when you sing together, for example, you generate bonds between you, and you sort of generate, courage and strength. That can be useful in all kinds of ways.
Yes, thank you. The other question, I'd like to talk about more peace building in the form of a dialogue. And I'd like to ask you, what role does dialogue play in building sustainable peace? And maybe you could share a situation where dialogue led to a breakthrough, actually.
Mhm. In our language, and the sort of the words that we have in relation to peace work is that it's sort of tied into the words that peace is the outcome, not the action. So peace building, peacemaking, these kinds of words, they're good words, they're great words, but it's in the word that you can have a dialogue, and then it can have you can have peace as the outcome, no? But I like to see dialogue as peace in itself, and it depends on also what level you're looking at. Is it sort of high diplomatic level? Are we speaking of sort of the end of the Cold War with Gorbachev and Reagan meeting in '85, for the first time in Geneva, and sort of the small sort of, softening up of enmity happening there? Um, or are we speaking of dialogue sort of at the level of civil society and ordinary people, where you can have, the several examples of reconciliation, for example, in Northern Ireland, of Protestants and Catholics meeting, and then suddenly, some shift happening, or the Balkans. But it's not always kind of like one sort of breakthrough where you have one moment of like, oh, it can also sometimes it's more sort of muddy, where it's not kind of like, maybe you felt that that's also my experience from mediation in a Danish context, that sometimes you are in the conflict mediation session, dialogue session, and then you feel like nothing is really happening, but then actually something did happen. Because yeah, you can have breakthroughs, but you can also have more sort of slightly softening up without necessarily experiencing it as this kind of breakthrough. Yeah.
That's a very interesting point. But if we talk about like more the global level, and
Mhm.
obviously we are facing a lot of challenges nowadays, and some people say that peace is idealistic or can be also ineffective. And in a world where one country can get attacked in one day by the other country, how should peace builders react, or what should they do,
Mm.
in your opinion?
And what do you mean what they should do in terms of to bring peace, or to
For example, we know Donald Trump names himself as a
Mm.
very yeah, good peacemaker. What would
Mhm.
what would your opinion be on that, for instance?
So I've analyzed Donald Trump's approach to peace diplomacy, and I mean there are some actually assets that he has, and also many challenges. So the number one asset that he has is that he's not afraid of speaking to his enemies or someone that others sees as the enemies of, let's say, the West. So that can be, of course, um, problematic if it becomes, too much of a friend of Putin or, whatever. But it's definitely a kind of in peace um, diplomacy, it is actually really critical that you have the bravery of looking your enemy into the eyes, even and then doesn't mean that you have to agree on anything whatsoever. You can really play hard, hard game towards your enemy. Also have some really good actually ideas from the previous General Secretary of NATO, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, on how to negotiate with Putin in a way that sort of avoids him trying to like add all kinds of extra things and never getting a deal, basically. So, but so that is kind of an asset of Donald Trump, and that he really do want to, I guess, get the peace prize and so on. But then he has many challenges, and one of them is that he's not very inclusive at all in his approach. So, and not very balanced, sort of who should he speak to first, all these kind of very important things in peace diplomacy. He's not very focused on that. And even in the case of his deal with the Taliban, he didn't bring in the Afghan government at the time, for example. So these kind of issues really, um, you know, paves the way for not the best agreements, basically. Also, he's kind of like very much sort of in public, make this deal, spectacular things, the way that uh, he said after his meeting with Zelensky in the Oval Office, where you had the tense situation emerging, he said afterwards, this will be good television, no? So he has this kind of idea that, let's make all of this good television. And that is really problematic in peace diplomacy because really you have to do things behind the scenes. It's a really bad move to sort of go out and say now this will happen and now everything out in the public. Uh, Especially because in the case of Ukraine and Russia and sort of Trump's approach to peace diplomacy here, we've seen that the things that he came out with in public were not actually true, or at least he didn't agree with the parties that that was the case, especially not with Russia. So he said things in public, and then Russia said, no, that was not what we agreed to, and we had all. So really, that ties to another thing. You really have to be write down what is that you agree to and agree to what you agree to, so not end up sort of in this weird situation where actually you didn't agree to anything. So that there are many lessons that he could take from kind of other experiences with the successful peace diplomacy.
I have to say, when there was an election period in the US, and I thought maybe when Donald Trump comes, then maybe it will be not like this soft influence on Putin, but maybe a more, if I can use the word, aggressive
Mm,
influence on Putin. And then I just, this quote by Winston Churchill came to me about the crocodile, that if you, I don't remember it directly, but it's about if the crocodile comes to you and you say, okay, I mean, you are agreeable to it, then it will anyway eat you. Maybe the less, but it will anyway eat you.
mm,
Yeah, that would be my question about when there is an aggressor and we try to soften the aggressor, what challenges there or what consequences we will face later.
mm. Well, I mean, I was slightly hopeful of Donald Trump's way of luring Putin into the whole peace process at first, sort of that he could somehow, because he didn't, I mean, he couldn't use the stick too much. He didn't, he could more use the carrot. So, but then the problem is you shouldn't give the carrot first and then ask for, concessions. No, you should ask for concessions and then say, if you do this, you can have the carrot. No, so I was, a bit, curious whether it would work the way Trump did it, which was the other way around. So he gave Russia lots of carrots in the sense of U.S. giving concessions to Russia, and then yeah, it didn't work out at all. So I think what if you want to give carrots, which you can do, I think you would have to do it as conditioned carrots, if that's the thing. Let's say if Russia agrees to a ceasefire and holds the ceasefire first of all, because the sort of the lessons or experiences from the Minsk 1 and 2 is that that's not something you can expect at all. That Russia kind of respects the ceasefire. So then you really need to put in carrots as something you can get in the future. So you could say, well, for example, the US, not Ukraine, but the US could agree to recognizing Crimea as Russian after half a year if Russia agrees to a ceasefire and holds the ceasefire, respects the ceasefire entirely, something like that. And in general, I mean, so the only good thing I thought with this, or one of the potential I thought with that process would be that if if the US gives in rather than Ukraine, I think that will sort of be a relief of some sort. You tell me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine that it's you know uh, Zelensky being democratically elected and being dependent on people's opinions and so on. And usually, if you give concessions, it's not very popular. No, you don't want to actually and never ever give any concessions. Whereas if you have the US giving concessions and sort of release, relieving Ukraine of doing so, not even maybe even not even having to sign the same piece of paper or something like that. Not even having to sign any piece of paper saying that US would uh, give concessions. I thought that might be some kind of opening, but at least for now, that hasn't been the case at all. So for now, it seems like just US have sold out without getting anything in return, and dropping the whole process at the floor instead. Yeah.
And that was a very nice comparison with the carrot. I think it will make the audience very clear about the tactic, and I agree. But when we already have the situation, we cannot, impeach Donald Trump and what he has already done and how it already has influenced Russian tactics. What should Europe do in this case, or NATO?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, one of the problems before Donald Trump came into this and sort of made his whole peace show was that the EU was kind of reluctant to speak of anything related to peace talks. When I wrote an academic article on peace talks in Ukraine, when, who, how, it was really like, oh, can you mention the word peace and so on. And that was also my what I've heard, from people working in the EU system that they didn't even want to prepare for the possibility of peace talks happening at some point. So I think that was a problem back then, but I feel, or I can see that EU has really stepped up and into the game after some months of first being shocked by the President Trump's efforts and saying, "Oh, why didn't you invite us?" and so on. But then they really came into the game. And I think they should keep that game and keep preparing. So even if you're not, even if there are no talks, you can still prepare. What if there will be a ceasefire? Who should monitor it? Who should, what types of sanctions should we have if it's not, respected and so on. So really being like prepared to the teeth as you are militarily, you can also be prepared to the teeth like diplomatically, so that if anything happens, you actually know who to talk to. I mean, we could have an EU or European representatives for Ukraine. Right now, we don't have that. We have it for the Middle East. We have, all kinds of kind of special envoys for different places, but we don't have it for Ukraine. And Ukraine actually said explicitly they wanted a European special envoy or special representative for the process in Ukraine, but still we don't have that. So I think that could be good, for example, to have one person to sort of uh, stay close to the process and, try to sort of prepare the grounds for as good of a process as possible for Ukraine, basically.
Mhm. So in general, to be more proactive also in this matter.
Yeah, proactive and prepared and think through, what would be the best negotiation setups, for example. I mean, I'm very inspired by the Iranian nuclear talks, not the ones that just happened, but the ones that led to a peace agreement or a nuclear agreement in 2015 that was led by the EU. And then with the five permanent members of the Security Council plus Iran. And I think that a setup like that would be more conducive for anything to happen that came would come closer to a more sustainable agreement for Ukraine if we had not just Ukraine versus Russia, but also the EU at the table, the US at the table, China at the table, uh, because that would sort of actually take the war to the level where it belongs. It will be more attractive, I guess, for Russia because they would see, okay, yes, we are actually we are not against Ukraine. We love Ukraine. Da, 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 da. I don't know what they say, but we are against the West. We want to talk to the West, and you can have lists of sanctions as concessions and so on, rather than territory. And you can have China maybe putting pressure on Russia in terms of giving up territory and things like that. I think the whole sort of sometimes you need to think through which actors should be at the table to have the most conducive conditions for having a more sustainable agreement. Who can, if it's just a question of territory, then maybe you can never really agree on anything. But if you bring, enlarge the number of issues you can discuss, like lifting sanctions and so on, maybe it's easier to getting anywhere.
And when we have this kind of people like Donald Trump in a very
Mm.
powerful position, and obviously when we look at the peace and its complexity, can such things which happen in peace building diplomacy, which we now observe, influence the peace builders in general and this diplomacy? And how does it influence it?
You mean Donald Trump's peace show, how that influenced the peace building community?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I was at the conference in the US in Chicago this spring, and one of the researchers that I was in a roundtable with, she said, "It's been wild." You know, it's been crazy to follow this, and that's what I've, experienced when I was at a diplomatic meeting at the Åland Islands, for example, speaking to different diplomats, and also in Switzerland. And, this spring I've been traveling quite a lot, meeting diplomats, different places. And my opening comment is just, something along the lines of crazy times or something. And then I don't need to say anything more. Then people start to talk. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then I wake up every morning and I check my phone. Okay, what happened? What did the U.S. president send now, or what did he start? Did he end the war or start a war? Or, but so really, I think most of all, it has sort of shaken the whole peace building community, diplomatic community, to be kind of in this state of everything can happen and you cannot trust anything related to the old logics. You just have to be super like uh, urgently aware and sort of conscious to what is happening right now and where can you best sort of influence this in a good manner. And really also, I guess, at least my experience from sort of at least peace research, we have focused a lot on like civil wars and these kind of things, and now we really need to bring in the peace logic also to the level of geopolitics and, high level policies rather than just sort of local level peace building, really bring in the peace logic also at the level of high level geopolitical tensions and great power rivalry.
Professors, researchers, peace-building activists in general have worked so hard for this topic, and then obviously people might get a bit distrust when one day there is one sentence said and the other day it's completely different. So yes, but
True. Yeah, some level of shock and kind of disbelief. But also, I mean, especially people who are actually working with these things can also feel a sense of urgency and agency. Like now you really need to act, now it's the time where we really need you, in a sense. So it can, you can lose hope, but you could also get kind of more sort of action energy that now is the time for you to actually really engage. Yeah.
yes, that's also true. Sometimes when I myself read the news and I think, okay, but will we ever get peace in Ukraine? And then I still do have hope because there are so many brilliant people in the world who also want the same. And I think that we can also reach the best for our world. I also wanted to ask you about the sincerity of some states and international institutions because a lot of peace initiatives supported, for instance, by different states, but can we truly speak of their sincerity, or is there any double reward which we don't see?
Like you mean like mediation support units or what type, or the UN, or what type of organization?
UN, for example.
I mean, sure, there could be different incentives at play, but really the UN has been increasingly sidelined in many of these issues. So now we have much more sort of mediation actors like Turkey and Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and here you can definitely discuss. I mean, I guess you can say quite fairly that they're quite pragmatic in what types of solution. It's not like they're kind of very vocal on women's rights and all kinds of things that they want to bring into any agreement or liberal values. And but I guess all organizations or countries working on peace mediation, peace diplomacy would have their own incentives, along with also, I guess, the incentive of actually ending the wars.
And in the context of the global South, do you think some peace building practices risk reproducing a colonial mindset imposed by Western values or structures?
Yeah, it could be, and it can, at least definitely can be experienced as such. Therefore, it's absolutely critical that you work together with local forces. But it's important to recognize that it's complex because it can also be, let's say, for example, when you speak about women's inclusion, then you can see it as a colonial, oh, we're just bringing Western values of gender equality. But you could also often see women's groups actually really fighting to get a seat at the table in a local context, and then them being sort of, the men saying, no, no, this is just colonial Western values, just stay away, from the table. So it's a complex issue, definitely.
Yes. I think that people sometimes do feel a bit powerless about how they can influence some things. And I myself also feel powerless from time to time. And what would you maybe recommend also like people who feel powerless sometimes to do, maybe in some small circle of influence to reach this maybe utopian peace or any peace we can get in the real world?
Hmm. I mean, one of the things I find useful is to be kind of ready. I don't know, it sounds maybe weird, but sometimes openings arise where you can actually do something. And the most important thing is for you to be looking out for these possibilities and kind of, I mean, maybe you can reach out yourself, but also sometimes you can also just be really like attentive to the possibilities arising. But I think the main thing is that even these big abstract phenomena of peace and conflict and war, you would think, okay, there's something happening above our heads, but actually it's not. It's actually us acting on an everyday basis. It's just human beings fighting or arguing or meeting in uh, diplomatic circles. So it's actually just all, lots of people, and you and I, we are just one of those or two of those people. So whatever we do are part of the larger um, sort of conundrum of actions and interactions that shape the whole spectrum of war and peace. At least that gives me a lot of like power to action to think, okay, actually, it's not just something happening above my head. I'm actually part of it. So whatever I do when I engage in the media in a Danish context, for example, I can sort of slightly, uh, bring out the idea that peace is a thing in the Danish context, and maybe help bringing out more peace diplomatic efforts from a Danish context that can play a role in, let's say, ending the war in Ukraine, or these kind of things. So for me, my experience is that you can actually do quite a lot, but it depends on your situation, uh, and maybe you cannot plan everything, but you have to be ready. That's the main thing.
It's very well said. And some people who say, okay, I cannot do anything. We are just small people in the world, but we are a part of the world.
Mm.
And about also about feeling powerless. Now, a lot of young people post on social media on the also different wars and conflicts, the hashtags or the stories. Is this a part of nonviolent resistance, if I understand it correctly, or how would we categorize it? And is it helpful?
Generally, like engagement on social media or a particular campaign.
Raising awareness. Let's say
Yeah.
in my case, I would post to stories about some atrocities which Russian army
Hmm.
does or Putin does, and maybe for example, Israel and Palestine the same. They would post also about awful things which are being done there. So raising awareness on the social media.
Hmm. Yes and no. So definitely social media, uh, involvement can be a use, can be part of doing peace. But the way I define peace really is this non-enmity, so actions that somehow cuts across enmity, cuts across conflict lines. So you can, I mean, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing to at all sort of raise awareness about atrocities. I think it's a very important thing. But I wouldn't characterize this as peace. I would characterize, the moment where you actually, try to also somehow reach out to your enemy as the main peace thing. Sometimes it seems like everything good is peace and everything bad is not peace. But I think peace should be defined sort of not um it doesn't have to be either good or bad. It can also You can also say, well, peace happening between Trump and Putin is bad for all kinds of things and people in the world, but it can still be called peace, and raising an awareness about atrocities in war. I wouldn't call it peace, but it can still be good. So I think it's important to sort of be very clear that peace doesn't necessarily is like the same word as good, no? Um, but um, but I think there are ways to also um, try to also sort of, make sow the seeds for reconciliation, or, slightly crossing across conflict lines through also social media, making contacts, or, for example, in the case of Ukraine, Russia, I've heard of Russian women, for example, helping out with the abducted children. So Russia abducted Ukrainian children. Which is, I mean, absolutely horrible. But then, Russian women actually trying to help out. But what I'm saying is that, the crossing across conflict lines, I think that really is what I see as peace. And I think it's a bit problematic that the peace prize was given to, in the case of Ukraine, Russia, was given to sort of two different organizations that were monitoring human rights violations and war crimes, rather than organizations that would actually cross across the conflict lines. Because it's not about giving in, it's not about actually giving up, of actually trying to reach out, because maybe that can be the thing that ends the war. That's what I'm trying to say. And I know it's like sensitive, so I hope I was able to formulate it in sufficiently non-provocative ways.
What I learned today is that peace is a very complex concept in general, and from very different perspective, it can be also seen very differently. And also, you mentioned about when you type peace and then you have just some picture without any action. It's just a symbol and a sign. And
Mm.
there is a movement, I guess, in the world which is, I mean, they are supporting peace. What would be your opinion on that? Is it just very idealistic, as you said, utopian, or a symbol, or maybe we have a hope to get peace all over the world?
Which peace movement?
I'm not sure, but for example, in Austria, I saw
Hmm.
many, not many, but sometimes there are people protesting, and and
Mm.
what I heard from them is they are supporting peace. I'm not sure how they are called, but they are against also weapons and so on. But in general, it's just pro peace.
Mm.
Any like they don't support any group or any conflict. They are just pro peace.
Mm. Mm.
Peace.
Yeah, that can be. I mean, that was a really big thing in the 80s, and also, previously in history, also actually leading up to the First World War. Bertha von Suttner, who was this Austrian, actually, you should really read her biography. I can really recommend it. She was this Austrian peace activist, and she was having this. Letter exchange with Alfred Nobel, who created the Nobel Peace Prize. So he was the one inventing dynamite, actually. But having this letter correspondence with the peace activist Bertie von Suttner, he became, also very engaged in peace. Um, but what I'm saying is that this whole peace movement, I think it's very important to have, and I think it's very weak today. It becomes too much kind of like, you're just hippies, you're just waving the peace signs, and go back to the 80s where you belong, and to John Lennon, and these kinds of more utopian, naive kind of approaches. And I think one of the problems is if peace becomes this symbol and this everything good, and also everything good goes together. So it's not only peace, it's also, you know, uh, climate change, and kind of, you know, gender, race, poverty, everything kind of like. And I think it's important, if you want to make change, it's important that you are very kind of, this is what we are working for. So I interviewed a diplomat high up in the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs quite some years ago, and she said, well, peace, we're not working with the concept of peace at all. And I asked why, why are you not working with peace? You're a diplomatic institution. And she said, well, we cannot operationalize it. So it's not something we can work with. So that's my main kind of thing that I try to, well, let's make peace concrete again. No, let's make peace something we can actually do, rather than something we can sort of just hope for, or, wish for Christmas or something.
And when we now take a perspective in, for example, in next 5 years or 10 years, do you think from where we are standing now, is there any, will there be any improvement in the peace in the world?
I think we are standing in a very, very critical moment in history, a dangerous moment and a moment of possibility. So a moment where sort of the structures of, quote unquote, the old world. I've spoken to diplomats and politicians saying we don't know if the UN exists in 5 years. And it's really hard to imagine if you've always, lived with the UN as an institution, obviously, and very, not necessarily powerful one, but at least a big one with lots of influence in many places in the world. So we haven't had so many wars than since the Second World War. and the institutions in place that should help us in these wars are significantly weakened. This posed great challenges, but also it posed a moment where maybe we could do something new. And I'm not thinking in terms of Donald Trump's like very let's say a little too innovative approaches to peace diplomacy, but like maybe this is the time to really, be very much kind of open to new ways of doing things. Uh, so I'm not going to predict what will happen in 5 years, but I'm just saying we are standing in this very interesting place in world history where we have one foot in the old world and then one foot sort of not being placed anywhere, just balancing in the free air basically, and we don't know where to put the other foot, no? So really, it's an open moment where many things can happen, but it's really on us, and that's where this whole, you ask, what should ordinary people do? Well, we really need all of us basically to be part of exploring new ways of doing things for this to go in a better direction. Let's say that.
Thank you. I agree. Thank you for a very interesting and important talk. Maybe there are some final thoughts you'd like to share, or maybe about your book.
I mean, the main thing also with the book, apart from making peace concrete and actionable, is because actually I wrote it as sort of a contra book to, or a comment to a book that is called The Logic of War, which says that in these times of war and conflict, well, it's the logic of war that will sort of guide things, and diplomacy will be sort of, second. It will be not that important. But I think this is exactly the time where we need diplomacy. That's exactly the time where we need to explore new ways of doing peace diplomacy, and we need to really bring out the logic of peace and sort of rearm as we are in Europe, but in terms of rearmament, in terms of military equipment and soldiers and so on, but also rearm diplomatically. So really to be extremely also forceful when it comes to peace diplomacy for this to actually bring out something better.
Thank you. I actually feel more hope after this interview as well. I learned a lot of things, and I guess we cannot take peace as just black and white. We have to look at it from very different perspectives. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for your excellent questions.
Thank you.